Red Lobster filed for bankruptcy in May 2024. It had been open for 57 years. It survived recessions, financial crises, changing tastes, and the entire collapse of the casual dining industry in the 1990s. And then, in the space of about 4 years, it was gone. Not because Americans stopped going to restaurants, not because the food got worse, not because of inflation or supply chains or any of the explanations that were offered at the time. Red Lobster was killed, deliberately, methodically, and profitably, by the people who were supposed to be running it. This is the story of how that happened, and it is not a story about shrimp. Red Lobster opened its first location in Lakeland, Florida in 1968. Bill Darden started it as a simple premise: bring seafood, which had always been expensive and inaccessible to most Americans, to the middle of the country at prices working families could afford. The concept worked immediately. By the mid-1970s, General Mills had acquired the chain and began expanding it nationally. For the next 3 decades, Red Lobster was one of the most reliably profitable restaurant brands in America. It was not glamorous. It was not trying to be. It was the place you went for a birthday dinner when you weren't rich enough for a steakhouse and wanted something more special than a diner. That positioning, affordable celebration, built a customer base that was loyal in the way that only genuinely personal memories can make people loyal. Generations of Americans had their first lobster at a Red Lobster. Graduation dinners, first dates, family reunions, the Cheddar Bay biscuits alone became a cultural institution. In 2014, General Mills spun off its restaurant division, which included Red Lobster, into a separate company called Darden Restaurants. Darden then made a decision that should have set off every alarm in the building. They sold Red Lobster, not to another restaurant operator, not to a hospitality company that understood the business. They sold it to Golden Gate Capital, a private equity firm based in San Francisco. The sale price was $2.1 billion. Here is what private equity firms do when they acquire a company. They do not run it. That is a critical distinction that almost no coverage of these deals ever makes clearly. A private equity firm is not a restaurant company. It is not interested in Cheddar Bay biscuits or customer satisfaction scores or whether the shrimp is fresh. It is interested in one thing: the return on its investment over a fixed time horizon, typically 3 to 7 years. Everything that happens to the business during that period is in service of that single goal. Sometimes that produces better businesses. Often it does not. In Red Lobster's case, what it produced was a financial extraction operation disguised as a turnaround. The first thing Golden Gate Capital did after acquiring Red Lobster was sell the real estate. This is called a sale-leaseback transaction, and it is the private equity playbook applied to restaurant chains. Red Lobster owned the buildings it operated in. Those buildings had value, significant value, accumulated over decades of appreciation. Golden Gate sold approximately 500 of those properties to American Realty Capital Properties for $1.5 billion and then immediately leased them back. The effect was that Red Lobster went from owning its locations to renting them. The $1.5 billion went to Golden Gate Capital. Red Lobster got a new monthly expense it had not had before, rent, at rates that would increase over time according to the lease agreements, and lost the equity cushion that had given the company financial stability for decades. To be clear about what happened here, Golden Gate Capital bought Red Lobster for $2.1 billion, immediately extracted $1.5 billion by selling the real estate, and left the operating company on the hook for the lease obligations going forward. They recovered the majority of their purchase price in a single transaction. Red Lobster, the restaurant business, was now significantly more financially fragile than it had been the day before the acquisition, carrying rent payments it had never carried before, with no property assets to cushion any future difficulty. This is the moment the end became inevitable. Everything that followed was consequence. Red Lobster limped along for several years under different ownership arrangements. In 2020, Thai Union, a Thai seafood conglomerate and one of Red Lobster's major suppliers, became the majority owner. Thai Union had a supplier relationship with Red Lobster that gave them a significant interest in how much seafood the chain ordered. More Red Lobster orders meant more revenue for Thai Union. This is relevant because of what happened next. In 2023, Red Lobster made endless shrimp a permanent menu item. It had previously been a limited-time promotion, the kind of loss leader event that drives traffic for a defined period and then ends before the losses compound. Making it permanent removed the defined period. The all-you-can-eat shrimp promotion, priced at $20, was losing money on every customer who stayed for more than one plate, and customers stayed for many plates. Red Lobster lost $11 million on the endless shrimp promotion in a single quarter. The decision to make it permanent was made while Thai Union, the shrimp supplier, was the majority owner. The promotion that killed Red Lobster generated significant shrimp orders that benefited the supplier who controlled the company. This was not a coincidence. It was a conflict of interest so obvious that it should have been stopped by any competent board operating in the interest of the company, rather than the interest of a shareholder with a separate financial stake in the outcome. It was not stopped. By early 2024, Red Lobster was closing locations. By May 2024, it had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The press coverage focused almost entirely on the endless shrimp promotion, a story so simple and slightly absurd that it traveled easily. Red Lobster went bankrupt because too many people ate shrimp. It was funny, it was shareable, and it completely buried the actual story, which was not about shrimp at all. The actual story was about what had happened to the $1.5 billion extracted in the 2014 sale-leaseback. The actual story was about a company that had been stripped of its property assets, burdened with rent obligations it could not sustain, handed to a supplier with conflicting financial interests, and then watched as decisions were made that served those interests rather than the health of the business. The shrimp was the final chapter of a story that had been written in 2014 when the real estate was sold. The ending was determined then. The only question was how long it would take to arrive. Here is what makes this more than a story about one restaurant chain. Red Lobster is a case study in a practice that is destroying American businesses at a scale most people never see, because the financial mechanics are invisible, and the coverage focuses on the symptoms rather than the cause. Sale-leaseback transactions, the same mechanism used to extract $1.5 billion from Red Lobster, have been used on Sears, on Toys R Us, on dozens of other American retail and restaurant brands that are no longer operating. In each case, the company's real estate was sold, the cash went to the financial owners, and the operating business was left to pay rent on locations it had previously owned. In each case, the company became significantly more vulnerable to any economic pressure, because rent is a fixed obligation that does not shrink when revenue falls. Sears filed for bankruptcy in 2018. Toys R Us filed in 2017. Both had undergone sale-leaseback transactions that extracted significant value from their real estate holdings and left the operating companies carrying lease obligations they could not ultimately sustain. Both had private equity ownership during the period when those transactions were executed. Both are now gone. This is not a coincidence. It is a pattern. The businesses that survive private equity ownership are typically the ones where the PE firm's exit strategy is aligned with actually growing the company, where they can make more money by improving the business than by extracting from it. The businesses that do not survive are typically the ones where the extraction is more valuable than the operation. Red Lobster's real estate was worth more to Golden Gate Capital than Red Lobster's restaurants were. That calculation was made in 2014. Everything else was predetermined. There is a Red Lobster location near you that is either already closed or is now something else. A chain restaurant, a retail space, a parking lot. Whatever it has become, it got there, not because the people who used to eat there stopped wanting Cheddar Bay biscuits. They did not. They wanted them for 57 years and would have kept wanting them. It got there because the financial structure built around the business after 2014 made survival nearly impossible, and because the people who built that structure made $1.5 billion in a single transaction and were gone long before the bankruptcy filing arrived. The shrimp was a distraction. The real estate was the story. And the people who understood that made their money and moved on before anyone was paying attention. That is what Below the Line is here to show you. Not the headline, the structure underneath it. Because the structure is where the money actually went, and where it always goes.